We're going to go ahead and get started with our first guest. I'm so excited to have him back. Larry Nemecek is our first guest. He was on the show when we did the late night show a year or so ago. He was actually at a Star Trek convention, and he was in the, I believe he was in a kind of a hallway type area. He called in on his cell phone. It was late at night. That's when we were doing the midnight till 2 a.m. show. And he had to catch a tram to get back to his hotel or he wasn't going to be there. So he gave us about 35, 40 minutes, and we didn't even scratch the surface. But Larry is an author, editor, interviewer, archivist, host, producer, and actor. He's known as Dr. Trek. He has a background in news and theater, but it's his Trekland where he's worked for over 20 years. He wrote classic Star Trek's The Next Generation Companion and the new Stellar Cartography map book set, worked on storied Star Trek experience in Las Vegas and world tours. He is everything Star Trek. If you look up Star Trek, you're going to find Larry. His website address is larrynemecek.com. He is by far the universe's renowned Star Trek authority. Without any further delay, let's go ahead and get Larry on the phone. Larry, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio, my friend.
Hey, Pat. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, we'll try to stay longer than 35 minutes.
I hope so, man. It was so great. And I remember you were with some other people. I think it was in San Diego at a convention.
It was the big, huge San Diego Comic-Con, and
right.
And it was the middle of the night, and I was not in walking distance, and the trams cut off at a certain time, and I was actually stuck having to go back, which I hated. I totally hated. I didn't even realize it would work out that way, but I knew someday I would return, so here we go.
Well, I appreciate it, and I want to thank you for giving up your time this weekend and spending some time with us. For our listeners that don't know about you, and of course now you're out to a totally new audience with our feed now being pulled into Global 24. Now
I heard that.
Yeah,
congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous. I'm trying to make everything work here tonight. Why don't you give all of our listeners a little bit of your background, how you got into what you do?
Wow. Well, I was one of the kids that had a million interests, and I was like a NASA kid before I was a Star Trek kid. My ninth grade teacher shamed me into going to watch Star Trek. She couldn't believe I wasn't. So my ninth grade science teacher. But I was a NASA kid. But I was always been a history buff. I love history. I love maps. But I build models. I was model railroading, model rocketry. I collected stamps. Today I guess I was a nerdy kid. But part of it was I had one brother and we lived out in the country, and you had to make in 3 channels on TV. Maybe 4, and you had to make your own fun. And I just had a lot of interest, and that followed me all the way through school, and I finally picked a couple of things. All such big, money earners here, journalism and theater. And because I wanted to make more money than teaching, even though I love teaching, too. I thought I'd be good at that. But anyway, so I went to that and kept having a lot of interest. And but along the way was a big Trek fan, and, not my whole biography, but I worked in news for about 10, 12 years back in my native Oklahoma. I got a degree in theater in Oklahoma, and also got a master's in Kansas. So I had what is that, jack of all trades, master of none thing kind of going there.
Right.
But when desktop publishing came out, and when the Next Generation kind of brought Star Trek back, so to speak, they'd had the movies, the first 4 or 5 movies, I decided that I had already stuck my toe in the water a couple of times. I loved Star Trek backgrounding, and I was a big Star Trek fan, but I loved the background especially, making the behind the scenes and also the fictional, filling in the gaps in the canon, because that's what attracts so many Star Trek fans is, oh, that hymn is a half inch too wide, and oh, that ship can't possibly have that number. That's not in the right, those kind of goofy things, but the history, timeline, and all that. So I wound up being lucky enough to put all that together and self-publish some guides when the Next Generation came out, which got the eye of people at Paramount and at Pocketbooks. And I got the contract to do the Next Generation Companion from the middle of the country, which was great. And then within a couple of years, I had some more offers, and my wife had a chance to work temp on Voyager when it launched. And so we actually moved to L.A. from Oklahoma with our kids and the whole, loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly, except it was Burbank.
Exactly.
And that's pretty much where she worked on Voyager for 5 years and then got out of the industry and now works in travel. And but I've didn't intend to go Star Trek all Star Trek all the time, but that's kind of where it went. Now, the last few years, the franchise has kind of got a little thinner here because they're not churning out so much stuff, but the world is also reinventing itself too, and with everything going online and global, and I think you read some of them there. I wrote Next Generation Companion. I edited the Communicator, the official magazine, for 8 years, and the Fact Files overseas, and just was really lucky and privileged enough to be a go-to guy for a lot of different projects. And there was so much you didn't think about it. And then when when Viacom split and CBS got Star Trek, and when the shows ended for now, I say, and our main company I worked for lost its license and didn't reform. Anyway, there was just a lot of upheaval in 06 and 05 and 06 and 07, and it turned into a world of go out and do it on your own, kiddo. It's the entrepreneur world. And so I started blogging and doing video and watching the world kind of reform. And that's kind of, where I've been too. I do some social marketing and that kind of thing along the way. But I speak at conventions and started working on my documentary, had the idea for that, and was privileged enough to get called in and play Dr. McCoy even in a couple of the fan films. And those are exploding. I mean, the landscape of everything is so, we can talk about this later, but the landscape is so insane right now all over the place that people are just making their own Star Trek and scratching their itch however they can,
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight, Larry Nemecek. Larry, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me back. I look forward to it. You sound like you had a whole stack of emails that came in already.
Oh, I did.
It's going to be fun.
Oh, we got a lot of questions, and we went through all your talking points, and we got a lot to cover tonight. But before we get to that, Star Trek is just it's amazing, Larry, how something back in the 60s, I mean, I'm sure in its day, Gene Roddenberry, of course, his vision was futuristic without a doubt, but how many people, and like yourself, do you hear when you go to conventions and stuff? Because I know you're so involved with the whole, with everything Star Trek. How many people kind of sit there and say they can't believe how a 1 hour show like that with, I don't want to call it campy because that fell into the Lost in Space camp and the Irwin Allen camp, but turned into the franchise that it is today. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, it is. And, it's like on several different levels. You have, one way to look at it is the actors. The guy, not even the main cast, but just look at some of the guest actors who, they worked 1 or 2 days on their guest show, and they did, 400 or 500 other shows in their time, in the 60s and 70s or whatever it was. And here it is, 50 years later coming up on, and out of all their 300 or 400 credits in their IMDb resume, people want to talk to them about the 3 days they spent on Star Trek in their guest star role.
Right, right.
Or have them sign some. I mean, that's like tip of the iceberg. But yeah, the main cast, I mean, they kind of got, blindsided a little bit. They were stereotyped a little bit. Shatner and Nimoy were able to, get out of it mostly. But for a long time there, it was almost like it was a downside because of the way they didn't have any, residuals and get paid for it. But, in the long run, they lived long and prospered, and then the spin-offs came, and because I guess if you look at it in the 60s, some people look at it in the 60s trappings, and you have to watch a little bit to get the fact that they had, great stories, and the actors had great chemistry, and they were in the style of the time, but it's not that. All the eras of acting have a little bit of that, and we appreciate what they are. But, well, but obviously, proof's in the pudding. It's still here, Well,
it is, and I've been a big Star Trek fan since I was a young kid, and I actually had an opportunity here. I think it was on Netflix. I saw a kind of a documentary that William Shatner put together. I think it's called The Captains or something, where he went and interviewed all the people that played the captains, and kind of at the end of the day, he really was glad that he did it. And he did get stereotyped, and that's okay. Because of where the franchise is. It's bigger than any movie. It's bigger than anything that most people are ever involved with in their whole life, in their whole acting career.
Yeah, and sometimes, the immediate outcome of something, you do feel like you can't get away from it. But when something has as many positives attached to it, even when people, within the family love to, whatever it is they make fun of, whether it's a catchphrase or his dramatic delivery, or whatever it is about,
Right.
the foam rocks, whatever it is you want to make fun of from the time, the things that transcend that still make it where people care. You know, it's like people care enough to want to make the jokes that it has been remembered because of the greater good that it is. And you live through that era to the point where you go, you know, like, then you get 20 and 30 years down the line, you go, holy smoke, there's people that were kids,
right,
that were raised up, you know, and you have generations of either the kids are brought up by their own parents that were fans, or you have something happen in the case of Trek where you had the spin-off shows and movies, and now, you know, there hasn't been anything new produced aside from the two JJ movies, but those, and now you have like the Blu-rays and the remastered shows. There are things that there are new fans. I mean, I thought what I did was going to get old and moldy here 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, but it doesn't. People still are coming along, and they haven't heard everything before, and they don't know. You know, it's like watching somebody discover any classic thing for the first time. But you get all. I remember one time a professor in college was talking about going to see a production of, you know, Romeo and Juliet,
mm-hmm.
and he's sitting there critiquing the set design and the acting and all, you know. But he realized there was a little girl with her parents sitting in front of him, and all at once she says, "Oh no, Juliet's going to kill herself." And he was like, "Oh my God, I wish I could come to something with that freshness of eyes." And we have so many Star Trek fans who are just right now even still coming that way.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it a lot of fun now. You know, it's still going, and every 5, 10 years, people. I mean, that's the other question. Who would have thought? You know, 50 years ago, this is still going, and we're coming up on the 50th anniversary in 2 years.
Well, and I mean, again, with what Roddenberry did years ago, I think what's amazing, and people where they're finding the genius of the man, is he was so ahead of his time in the things that he was doing. I mean, bringing in an African American on a spaceship, you know, with Nichelle Nichols, in the subject lines that he touched, it was all, I mean, just so far ahead of its time. It was unbelievable. To put something like to get that together. And I believe, you know, there's a lot of books. I mean, there's so much Star Trek stuff out there, but a lot of the things that we have today are a direct correlation from the things that, you know, was his imagination 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Well, and, you know, there's a couple of things here. You know, number one, Gene didn't invent everything that we think of as Star Trek. I mean, he came up with the framework, and he took a lot of the slings and arrows and bruises
right
to get it done, because it was pretty out of the box. I mean, on one hand, you almost think there for a while, you know, now, of course, the genre shows science fiction, especially thanks to Next Generation, on the original series' shoulders, but that's all exploded, and now you have mainstream shows that have fantasy and sci-fi elements to them, and it's no big deal, but at least in the 60s, you were still close to the Twilight Zone, and you were still close to some of the 50s sci-fi. It was just hard to do it on a TV budget and what they had to work with, you know.
Right.
And he took a lot of, you know, bruises and things for that, and insisted on not being browbeat, because they did go over budget, and they did have problems, and they were late delivering at times, and it was crazy, and it did burn everybody out when they did the show. But he hung in there and stuck to his guns, and he burned out. And, you know, and then Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana and Bob Justman and all these people who are, you know, who deserve a lot of credit for making the original series what it was. But it was his original thing of saying, hey, I want to tell some stories, and some of them are a little subversive, and here's how we'll, you know, because he had his show, The Lieutenant, that was about a military base in peacetime, and they had a show about racism with a black Marine and the JAG office, and he got censored, and they never got to show it. And so he's like, well, damn, I want to talk about those stories, so what can I do? Oh, I'll have purple people in a spaceship, you know, and no one will ever suspect. And that's what they did, you know. They sneaked it by the censors, but the audience was, and he always assumed the audience was smart.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that made Star Trek, you know, last all this time, was not even just the stories, but even not insulting people's intelligence about the background. You know, in 1 week, you make a left turn in the hall, and there's the bathroom, and 2 weeks later, you make that left turn, and it's not a closet, it's still the bathroom. I mean, you know, to that level.
Exactly.
They always thought the audience was smart and never looked down at them, and that's part of the thing. I think that gets overlooked a lot, is people forget that that's part of it, or else it could have been a really fun show with great characters and great stories, but hanging on for 50 years, I mean, all of that's the Star Trek, you know, formula.
Well, what I thought was interesting, what I find is so interesting in it is, again, the technical stuff that came out. I mean, today, of course, now whenever there's any sort of new science fiction type of movie or program launch, of course, you've got the people that just jump on board and they come up with all the technical stuff. But I mean, I remember when I was a little kid. At a very young age, finding the blueprints. I still have them. The blueprints for the Enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, somebody took that and drew drawings and made it somewhat believable. And now there's all these different websites. I think it's called Ships of the Fleet, or there's several of them that have unbelievable detailed drawings. It's like you could almost build the real thing from these drawings.
Oh yeah, that was Franz Joseph Schnabel, and he was a draftsman in San Diego, and his daughter was a huge fan. He wasn't so much, and she was like, "It'd be cool if we could do plans." And this was like after the show was gone, but the revival was just starting to happen, like 72, 73, and he did those, and they self-printed them, and they sold out in a minute at this convention in San Diego, and he redid them, and then he got a contract to sell them. He got licensed to sell them, and then he did the technical manual, and that was when that was like on the New York Times 10 bestseller list. The tech manual was. It came out of nowhere, and that's one of the first times that the money people saw Star Trek and said, "Oh, you call it a cult if you want to, but I think we can make some money on this."
Right.
And it quantified numbers enough. People said, "Oh, well, maybe we did make a mistake. Maybe they did make a mistake canceling this show. Maybe we should bring it back." And that was one of the first, pings. So, again, that's the whole Star Trek story is the shows and the writers and the creators and all that. But there's so much, involved in the Trekscape. And you were talking about technology, and now we've got, there's always been a mutual love affair with NASA and Star Trek, and now you've got technologists and futurists and designers, whether they're even conscious of it or not, they just design Star Trek because that most of the time that made sense.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
So and you can't read a news story about, they're trying to, here's another baby step toward a transporter or a baby step toward, replicators. And the writers always use, with very few exceptions, it's always a Star Trek thing. Scotty wouldn't have approved, but scientists at MIT have this, How many times do you read a story like that?
You don't.
It starts off that way.
You don't. Hey, you want to take a call, Larry?
Sure. I'd love to.
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. We're on with Larry Nemecek.
Larry.
Hey.
This is Van Archer calling.
Oh, my gosh, it's Van. I wondered if I have any familiar voices.
Oh, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. And this is great, Pat, because Van is such a fan of the new movie that I can't say not. Okay.
Actually, that's one of the reasons I called. I was curious. I've seen a lot of merchandising that is geared toward the original series or Next Generation, and specifically, I see a lot of novels that they've come out with their own little tagline of the original series. I mean, they have to make sure it's an original series. I've seen very few novels based on the new movies. I know there's a couple of them out there. I was wondering, since you were the expert on all things Trek, and I bow to the Grandmaster, what is your opinion on the trends? I mean, do you think, I've seen things online that a lot of people think the Abrams films are hopefully just a flash in the pan and they're going to go away and we'll get back to something that we all recognize as Star Trek. And just wanted to know your opinion on that. And one side note, I absolutely love Star Trek Continues. You guys are doing such a fantastic job on that show.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I truly enjoy it. The past couple of episodes have just, the acting, I'll play devil's advocate for a second. They're amateur actors, and I accept that. But, man, I watch those shows, and it's like I'm watching an episode of Star Trek I've never seen. It's just like putting on Star Trek, and I'm like, this is it. And I really appreciate the efforts you guys are doing.
Well, that's great. Well, I'll take exception with you a little bit and amid your praise. There are a lot of professionals who are working on that show as actors too, and I think it's set an all-time high bar for quote unquote fan films. We're talking about Star Trek Continues path. It's,
Okay.
The fan film that I was very privileged to play McCoy in the first 2 times, and it's done 3 episodes, and they're about to film a 4th and 5th early next year. But thank you, Van, for saying that. I think I knew you felt that way anyway. But that's one thing that in the midst of not having. I mean, I'm not sure what your question was in the middle of that. I'm so blown away by your compliment there. But
my question was, I've seen a lot of merchandising geared toward the original series.
Oh, yeah.
And not so much as the new movies. That might be contractual between CBS and the films and all that. But I was just wondering what you see in all the conventions you go to and all the feedback you get.
Well, when Enterprise went off the air in 2005, and it was the end of, Rick Berman's TV era and everything that started with the Next Generation coming, ending the drought there. There'd been a movie every 2 years, the original cast, but that gave it some direction. And they had, 3 spin-offs. One was a prequel. And then when that kind of ran its course, maybe even a victim of its own success, and people were, the mainstream press was like, oh, well, Star Trek's dead. It was a nice run. Well, I knew. And anybody that didn't just want to sell papers or, website hits knew that you don't have a billion-dollar franchise, like multi-billion-dollar franchise like that, that's quote-unquote dead. It's going to come back. It was just a matter of when and how soon and who would be running it and how well would it be done. And so within a year, when they announced that, JJ and Bad Robot were going to do new Star Trek movies, people were like, see, I mean, I knew it would probably be a movie before a series because it's easier to do a movie without as big an investment in time and people and all that, And so a lot of that made sense. And then when it was obvious they were going to do an alternate universe and change some things and spend a ton of money and have a really good cast, I thought all the casting was really good. And there's controversies, and but people are curious, and there was all that excitement for 2, 3, 4 years, yay and nay, and people on and then it debuted, and it was a huge movie, and a lot of people were not happy with it. A lot of people were resigned and tried to enjoy the movie. A lot of people totally enjoyed the movie. A lot of people were brought in as new fans because of the movie. And then we had 2 or 3 years, But I think what finally happened was what I've been saying at the risk of. And the good thing about having a blog is that now you say something instead of just saying you once said it. Now you can point and have proof. But it's like I said, whether it's a hit or a miss, whether people love it or hate it, it's just a movie. And we will wake up the next day and people will go, oh, that was 2 hours. And I know how Trek fans are. They want their stuff being churned out. And it's like we have to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years to get 2 more hours. Now we need a TV series back.
Hey, Larry,
I knew that would eventually happen.
We got to take a quick commercial break. Van, you want to hold on the line for a few?
I can hold.
Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Star Trek expert Larry Nemecek. Larry, again, thank you for being there. Van, Larry, why don't you pick back up again? Sorry, we had a break for just a few minutes.
That's fine.
Oh, no, that's good. No, I was just trying to answer his question. I'll try to rope it in here a little neater. But no, I mean, I think there's been a ton of people come in with the new movies. I hear from them at conventions. You can't miss it. And we've had a lot of people come in from other things too, but they have been great for ramping in new fans. But whether you loved or didn't like the movies, and a lot of people are very defensive and love them because they think they're, with it and modern, the way people use the original series. Oh, it's all plywood and, and blinky lights and bad models and foam rocks and all that. But you saw through that and loved the characters and the stories, but and now they've remastered a lot of the effects. And, people might say the same thing about some of the new movies. They're flash and explosions, but they're made for a world market. So, people love to debate that. I don't know if we have Star Trek. We didn't have debates. Fans would find something to fight over. But it seemed, one way or the other, I almost think it's made things stronger. And as far as the merchandise goes, a lot of that's the math. I mean, there's 737 hours of the Prime stories out there, and there's just 4 hours of JJ, so of the alternate universe. So some of the merchandise reflects that, and Bad Robot kind of has a control more over their own stuff than what CBS has over all the other Prime, series and all that. So,
Gotcha.
So there's more material to cover, and they're more used to doing all that kind of thing.
Let me ask you guys, real quick. Did Paramount or CBS, did they go, obviously we had it was the Next Generation film, with Picard and everybody. Of course, they did kind of their last one. I think Nemesis was the last one of that group. And while I enjoyed the movie, it kind of was the finality of it all. I was kind of hoping we were going to see maybe Riker pick up with something. And then there's always been talk about, George Takei doing something with Captain Sulu. Did the franchise definitely sunk? Did CBS or Paramount go to JJ, or did JJ come to him? Who kind of fired it all back up again?
Well, it was really JJ came to Paramount to do a big movie deal that had, like I will do 12 series or 12 movies in, 10 years or whatever the life of it was.
Right.
And among those movies, we'll reboot Star Trek, or we'll redo Star Trek as a big new modern movie. There wasn't ever like a one-to-one, hi, I will come in and do 3 Star Trek movies. Now the actors are signed to like 3 picture, kind of standard contracts with a 4th option kind of a thing. But as far as Bad Robot producing Trek movies, it was part of their bigger deal with Paramount. So, and then from that evolved, and that all happened right as Viacom, they used to have 3 guys kind of running, one of them left, and then it was Les Moonves and Tom Freston, and they decided to split, which I think was a dumb decision. They split Viacom into pieces, and all the family, I call it the Viacom divorce. And everybody, both sides of the couple that was left, they divvied up all the properties, and it was going to be CBS and associated things and Paramount Pictures and associated stuff. And there were cable channels in that, and publishing arms. They sold off the Paramount parks, but then it came down to Star Trek, and they kind of fought over whether it was a movie franchise or a TV franchise, and the movie franchise finally won, and that's why it went to the CBS side. And then they came up with the thing about, well, all of Star Trek will be licensed with products through CBS. Paramount will have first look on the movies, and they came up with all these, and the DVDs and Blu-rays, all these little picayune kind of things that in practice have been kind of confusing and difficult to put into practice. I mean, they still had, products come out and things for fans come out, obviously, but it hasn't been the cleanest break. And the way I've kind of said over the years was it's almost as if in the Viacom divorce, Star Trek went with Mother CBS, but it gets to go to Daddy Paramount, once every 4 years and have a great weekend, and then it goes back to its mother that's not doing much with it right now.
Gotcha.
Quick little comment. Give me a second. Where was I going with it? Oh, yeah. There are many fan films that in the past 10 years that have been made based on Star Trek, whether it be trying to make a new episode of the original series, trying to make a spin-off of the original series. There's been many projects, and I know Larry is fully aware of all of them. There's one that's getting quite a bit of attention, that Battle of Axanar. I forget the exact title of the
Right.
But it's my impression that CBS is actually sort of looking at these going, some of this isn't bad. Some of this we actually give our blessing to. That's the impression I have. I mean, I've been reading feedback on various things. So I was wondering if you think what your impression is of that. I'm kind of thinking that maybe that's going to reinvigorate an interest in a new Star Trek series. And I had one other comment, but it eludes me right now. So just wanted to let you guys know that, or let Larry know that I love the work you're doing. It continues. And I mean, it's so much fun. I get together with a few of my friends when they release a new one, and we watch it. It's just like a brand new episode of Star Trek that we've never seen. The production value on that is the production quality is so high.
It is.
I mean, it's exactly like you're watching the original series again. And it's just, maybe it's retro or whatever, but I'm really enjoying it. And Anyway, just want to know what CBS's impressions were of the films that are coming out, because I know they've been taking notice of some of it.
Yeah.
And
well, again,
I'm just going to say that I hope this third JJ film is it, and it's gone. And I remembered what I was going to say. I'm sure it was something about the Paramount Parks being sold off, which led to the closure of the experience in Vegas. And I don't know what would be involved. To me, and it could, it's all down to who has contracts with what, who owns what. But there is such a huge following of Next Generation in Britain, Europe, that to me, I think it was a huge mistake that there's parks being opened in Europe all the time. There's a Doctor Who experience open, there's a Harry Potter thing that's open, and I think they just ought to rebuild the experience as it was in Britain. I mean, it would be further for me to go to, but I mean, I think they could make a lot of money there because of all the fan base. So, that's what I have to say.
Okay, wow, Van, you really, let's see if I can run through this real fast. You're right about some of these parks that are being announced with the Star Trek corner in them if they've got a Paramount affiliation. Let me back up one thing. Selling off Paramount Parks in the split was not why the experience closed. Because Paramount Parks, most of the parks were sold, many of them were sold to a company called Cedar Fair, which already existed and did theme parks. And Cedar Fair, among their things they bought from when that was sold off, they bought the experience in Vegas. They weren't the reason it closed, and it wasn't Paramount/CBS. It was the Hilton, the original Host Hilton Hotel there, the Las Vegas Hilton. When the 10-year deal was up, they wanted out because they had just decided that it was old and musty and Star Trek was dead, and they could put the space to much better use.
Like Barry Manilow.
Yeah, or like the Michael Jackson Museum. That was the big thing that was going to go in there. And if you know, not only did nothing ever go into the space once it was allowed to go, and Paramount tried to get it extended at least a year just to be there for when the JJ movie opened. But not only did it go away and get pulled down, nothing ever went in there, and then the Hilton itself just kept kind of going down in a spiral, and they lost their branding, and then they were Las Vegas Hotel, and anyway, I think they, but as soon as the original group signed the deal in 1996 or whatever it was, the successive administrations of the Hilton always regretted it and wished they could be out, and the minute the 10-year thing was up, they would not even add like an add-on year. So it wasn't about what was going on with Viacom. Totally, one of the three partners wanted out as soon as they could get out, even though they kept turning over with new people. So that's what that was. And yes, everybody and their dog is dying to have it come back. They tried to put something together kind of quick. The people and the financing, it was right after the crash in 2008. That didn't help things. But everybody is dying to have a Mecca, a Trek fan tourist Mecca like the experience again. I don't think it would be in Europe, just because even though they're really Germany and London and the UK are huge fan bases, but they still don't have the numbers that we have in the States. And something like Vegas, maybe another place, everybody still likes Vegas as a travel destination. So you can go there for your Star Trek and then still have fun, or you can go with your wife or your kids and everybody can find something to do and you can go and get, engage your Trekness. So that's, the kind of standard thinking is if not Vegas, some other tourist destination. And and Van, you brought up so many points, I don't even remember now what I brought up, but that's...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spread across the board.
Oh, you're still there.
Thank you for your answers on the experience question. It was just something that was in the back of my head. Yeah. And I just see these destinations being opened up in Europe, and I'm like, well, why don't they go there? Was part of it. But my other point was the fan films. Star Trek Continues, Phase 2, Star Trek Axanar, and I know CBS is taking notice of these, and maybe they'll take their cues from these going, hey, maybe this is what people want.
Well, a lot of what's happened the last few years, there's a lot of, I don't want to say inertia, but there's a lot of the world is changing. Fan films were kind of moot 10 years ago, 12 years ago, because you couldn't make a movie on the laptop, and now you can, kind of. And that it's that way with a lot of aspects, and sometimes there's technical, licensing, legal issues to deal with, but the thing we've kind of operated with, Star Wars was where the fan films really got going. Troops and Pink 5 and so some really fun things, and the internet and YouTube and this whole digital online revolution that we've had. It's decentralized things so much. It all plays into this too. It's just the landscape of the country and what fans can do, and everybody and their dog does a mashup or drops in whatever they do. So part of it is when these first got going, when the Trek ones first got going, when Phase 2 and Farragut were first going, it kind of became the policy of, okay, we won't shut people down. Part of this is how many franchises wish they had people at home spending their own money to come up with something like this. So it's kind of a thing of, as long as you don't embarrass the franchise and piss people off and rip people off, just don't make any profit. And that's been kind of the line to balance. Now, Lucasfilm, embraced fan films after a while and had festivals, and you became property of the corporation after a while. But you were, they were encouraging that way. And Star Trek just, part of it, I think, was because the administration shifted and we had it went from Paramount to the Viacom split and going to CBS. So there's been a lot of evolution. And about the time people think they figured out what's going on in the digital world out there, what people can do at home, then it shifts or it grows by a quantum leap. So, and I know that friends at CBS and people in the upper echelons, they love that, but they have to be true to stockholders, and so that somebody 10 years from now doesn't come along and say, well, I'm sorry, but back in 2014 you let these people do this with Star Trek, so now I can do, over here. So you can't abandon your franchise rights. So it's just all a complicated thing. And so what we have now is kind of like the balancing act of where everything is right now. But people are getting their fix. They're putting it out there. It's keeping Star Trek alive. It's been great for fandom. It's giving people something to talk about in between movies. People get to indulge their passions. A lot of people are doing good work, and that they're proud enough of they put it in their credit reel.
Right,
directors
right.
or writers or actors or cameramen or whatever. So that's kind of where that is. And other franchises are dealing with the same thing. It's all kind of this interesting balancing act. And if anything or anyone gets out of hand, then something might jump into. And people are pushing the envelope. So we'll see where this ride goes.
I guess my question was, I understand the balancing act, keeping the franchise rights, and how important that is to them, because I remember there was a Star Trek fan club years ago, back in, it's still around, but this happened back in 82, 83, where Paramount sent them a cease and desist letter because they were using the font of Star Trek on their letterheads and things of that nature. And Paramount was like, you will stop because we own this and we will sue. So, the upper echelon of that club, some of the members actually quit the club in order not to be sued by Paramount. But what my question was intended to go is, do you think the powers that be are noticing the fan films as to what they're doing story-wise and what they are creating?
Oh, they're definitely there.
And wondering if they're like, okay, well, maybe if this is what people want, this is what we should go to. This is what's popular. This is what people are into.
Yeah. JJ thanked James Cawley and the Phase 2 crew for, quote-unquote, recasting Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and they were extras on the first movie and got a set tour. Yes. But, at the same time, the other things that are registering with CBS is the numbers that still continue on Netflix and the numbers that sell on the Blu-ray discs. And, lots of things are out there. And, again, it's an evolving, fluid world, out there. And now we have Netflix and we have the streaming services, Amazon Prime and, doing original programming. And we have so many different layers of not just the
network.
Sure,
if somebody started making a net series, like maybe if Star Trek Continues actually became so-called approved and licensed by CBS, and make it a net series, that would be awesome. Just want to say, I got to let someone else get into that, and hopefully there's other callers.
Yeah. When I was going to say real quick, when you get into that, then you're into things like residuals and rights and retro.
Yeah. Well, they got to pay residuals and rights to somebody if they're going to make a series.
Exactly.
It might as well be you guys.
That's a can of worms that nobody wants to really.
Hey, Van, we got to take an NBC news break coming up. I want to thank you for calling in and all the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Van.
Thank you.
Thank you. So much stuff to talk about, Larry. The first hour went real quick. We've got an NBC News break coming up. Can we keep you around for another hour?
I think you can talk me into it.
You don't have to catch a tram or nothing?
No tram to get back to my house. I'm sitting right here.